I met him when I was almost 18. I just graduated from Central Music School, got through the entrance exams to Moscow Conservatory, and here I was a perfectly prepared material, wide-eyed and looking for a whole new religious, mystical, ethical system, which this man offered. I was a very active student of his, and I managed to do 40 pretty much impossible, incredibly risky things for him. I was completely under his spell, almost 8 years. Eventually, he became convinced that he was second coming, no less. My name is Dmitry Sitkovetsky. I'm a violinist and conductor, and this is Keeping the Flame, a series about how family, politics, and great art shape a life, but never determine its destiny. In 1972, I told my best friend, this summer I'm going to meet my guru. We were very much into this whole Indian philosophy and the whole quasi-religious thing. And sure enough, be careful what you wish for. You might get it. Well, I mean, I know exactly when I met him. I came to Ivanovo. It's a retreat place for composers, but also for other musicians. What was called House of Creativity, Dom Tvorчества. You would get, at least for a few weeks or for a month, a dacha, a house with all the food, drink paid for you. So you lived in the community. So there was a number of various Soviet composers there. And among them, I noticed this very sort of unusual looking man with those Armenian eyes, but coming out with very strong look. And somehow there was a connection between us, and that's how we met. His name is Yosif or Joseph Andriasov. He was a Moscow-born Armenian composer, Armenian heritage. He didn't even speak Armenian. He was a very, very gifted composer. He got me interested in some of his music and eventually in his philosophy and all of that. I would say it was two layers in that. One was clearly I was looking for somebody who would show me an alternative way of life. The Soviet intelligentsia, as brilliant as they were, and they were fantastic actors and ballet dancers and composers, interesting people, but they all basically, they led a life of a compromise. And I was a maximalist. That probably came not from my father and certainly not from my mother. So my mother's world, also my aunt and my grandma, was very, very foreign to me. My aunt would come from Bolshoi Theater, my grandma come from another opera house, and they would just talk about the relationship between singers, the affairs, the intrigues, the terrible conductors with huge egos. I thought they lived a little bit like petit bourgeois. I was interested in all the things my family was never interested in. Eastern philosophy, Indian, in religion in general. None of my family was religious. I was not brought up Jewish at all. If anything, I grew up in a Russian Orthodox church because of my nanny. And I'd read the Bible and the New Testament. And also I was doing quite a bit of yoga at that time. But the other thing also, I was in a crisis as a performer because my life was not going from success to success. I had an early success when I was 12 years old. I was not developing as fast because I was not a child prodigy. But at that time, there were genuine child prodigies around me. And so I began to doubt my own ability. And whether I really was meant to be a concert violinist, maybe I should do something else. And that was difficult for me because I was not born to be, this knight in a shining armor fighting everybody. I became that way. And he made me a lot stronger by doing very cruel things psychologically. He went into his own crisis as a composer, and that's why he went into this whole philosophical and mystical and this and that. The theory was that you had to live righteously in the name of God, but also in the name of morality. And he wrote the book of morality. Everything that you've done could be interpreted either positively or negatively, whether you made a compromise with your conscience or there was a self-serving element. It's basically the road to enlightenment. So I gave up smoking. I started smoking at 13 and I gave up at 18. That was my first smoking period. Second period was from 25. And then when both he and I started to smoke again. But for 7 years, I used to have dreams where I would wake up in cold sweat because in the dream I would start smoking again. And not so little was the fact that he decided to be celibate, and so he made me celibate as well. I was celibate from 18 to 23. Well, I certainly made up later on, but for 5 years at that age, it was a torture. It was not just celibacy or smoking, it was also being virtuous. His book of ethics and new morality, some of it, of course, in retrospect, seemed quite naive, but at that time was the greatest things. And I helped him to take it to all kinds of people to help him. I remember when I gave his book to still living in Russia, Rostropovich, who I knew, of course, as long as I remember myself, in view that Rostropovich will show it to Solzhenitsyn, who was still living in his dachas. And I asked Rostropovich twice, and he said, "You just like me. You get so excited and you get so focused on helping that it'll go one day. It's okay. I understand." Of course, he did nothing. But at the end, he was right. At that time, I thought, he couldn't understand. And it is true in terms of whatever I get interested in. I put my whole sort of being, and I make sure that everybody who knows me, who likes me, who wants to help that person. So I risk ridiculous things. He was determined to have this book published in the West, but unfortunately, as it turned out, the big publishing houses were not interested. How would they know about that? Because in 1975, when I went to Berlin, of all places, as a Soviet student still, he put 3 microfilms in my violin case. I was basically smuggling out microfilms. If they would find that at the border, I would go to jail. But, when you're that determined to help, at that time I was always sort of going all in. But I managed to smuggle them out. I stayed in a hotel by the Zoo in Berlin, and I went to the post office and I mailed to 3 publishing houses, Imka Press in Paris, Passev Frankfurt, and the one, I don't even remember the name of the publishing house in London. So that was one of many, many things I did for him. I even went as far as stealing at a party of a Mexican diplomat, Carlos Lagunas, who's a lovely, lovely man who was a good friend of our family. And I went there with a special mission because I knew, being a diplomat, he must have had that all-important book of all the foreign journalists with their phone numbers, which was more valuable than gold. Imagine, because that was in English. And I saw that book in his study, and the party was in the living room, but I sort of went, they showed it, I saw that thing. And in front of everybody there, I managed somehow to put it behind me and cover it. And that was the house where they took me when my father died, and I was 3.5 years old. So everything was connected. And then I would call the journalist of Washington Post, of New York Times. That was incredibly risky. You had to do it from a payphone. And quite a few of them came and met him. And one even wrote about him in one of the books on Russia. And, in Soviet Union in 1975, 76, are you kidding me? It's a miracle that I was not taken. In a way, I did not feel great. I mean, it was quite a feat to steal it and with all the other people there. But to the man who I really liked, and he meant absolutely no harm. He had no idea why I did it, but I did it. And I just met his daughter, who is now in her 60s in Hamburg Ballet as one of the ballet teachers. And I confessed to her. I said, that I actually did something which I'm not proud. And she said, at that time, you did the right thing. You helped dissidents. You had to have it. So her reaction was quite extraordinary. So there was a lot of activity. In quite a short time, he basically sort of took the role of the father figure, and father who gave you specific tasks to do if you believed in what he was doing. The hardest thing, and that was also part of his pull back and push forward, pull back and push forward. Every time I would do something really extraordinary, like smuggling these microfilms, he would doubt that I actually did it because they didn't answer. That means that it's me who's lying to him, or maybe I'm working for KGB. And the more he suspected, the more I tried to prove to him that he was wrong. But sometimes you couldn't prove. So the whole time I'm living not just a double, a triple life. One is being a Soviet citizen, studying in Moscow Conservatory. The other, the secret life, being, sort of a disciple of Joseph and his company. And 3, trying to prove to him that I did all of that just for you. And you paid me back with that? He was quite paranoid right from the start, that you could see. And that developed more and more and more. But what he was doing at the same time, as I realized later on, he was also trying to move me away from all the influences that I had. So it was a big musical personality that thought sort of differently than the school I was in. And so there was freshness, and he said, oh, listen to this and listen to that. But I remember when I would go and be influenced by him, for instance, on the beginning, how to play the theme of the famous chaconne, Bach chaconne. The theme is in the bass, there's no question, but because the violin, because of the nature of the so-called modern bows, you cannot play all 3 or all 4 chords at the same time. So most violins play it almost as an appoggiatura, tadim, padim, padim. And I was under his influence, and I came to Bezrodny, who became my teacher, who I liked very much and had great respect. And I remember that we had an argument, Bezrodny and me, for about an hour, the whole lesson about just the theme of the Bach. I was so stubborn and so sure that he almost had a heart attack, poor Igor, because I was completely besotted with this new way of looking at things. Then, of course, he turned even, specifically against my mother, who he thought was a brilliant pianist, but, she was not as spiritually advanced. And I bought into it. I was not worshiping my mother like it was a monument. My father was a monument because I could never argue with him. My mother had her things that she liked, and the other things she was not particularly interested in. Her domain is 88 piano keys. She does not need anything else. I was never just happy in my four strings on the violin. So we were wired differently. And then this man comes in and everything, and his clear drive was to estrange me from all my family so I could support him, which I did financially. Maybe the biggest thing I did for him is I brought him to the West. And so when I arrived in New York, I started the whole campaign to get him out of Russia. And I hired a lawyer who wrote to Senator Javits, and I organized special concerts. And I made him a dissident he never really was. But he came out. He came out pretty much 2 years after I left. And for that, I did heroic efforts. I got all my New York friends, all my US friends helping them. And then he treated some of them very badly because he was already panicking in the West that it was not going as well. I just found the other day, looking through my scores, just last night, I think, I found a score of Matteo's Passion in May 77, just before I left, probably our last meeting, and said to my бесценный son, priceless son, Dima, or Dimachka, he even called me, with this priceless score by Bach. That was dedication from me. And then at some point, as the story goes, you have to kill your father. And I did. But I didn't kill my real father. I killed this one. So there was a poetic justice and all that at the end. I left him in 1980. Very soon after I met my wife, Susan was very instrumental into putting the last efforts for me to break away because she saw straight through it. And I brought him another sort of a substitute supporter because I was leaving Russia at the same time with Viktor Lubotsky, who also never knew his father, had a huge father complex, maybe even bigger than mine. And he was just worshiping everything I was doing. And since I was serving this greater purpose, he was so ready to be devoted that he's still helping him till this day. Or him now, it's not him because he died in 2000. Now his family, I'm sure. He's in San Francisco Symphony. So there was a lot of ripple effect of all of that, but I became a lot stronger after almost 8 years under his influence. In psychology, I'm a trained assassin. If somebody tries to play those games, there is no chance of them winning because I never blink. And I do not actually get angry. I make sure that you lose, and you lose badly, because that's how he trained me. After almost 10 years as a music director in Korsholm, which is Finland, in the city of Vasa, all of a sudden I have this invitation to be the head of Seattle Chamber Music Festival. And I only agreed to it with the condition that 1 year I will do just chamber music, but the following year, in 93, I will bring my orchestra in residence. So that was a gentleman's agreement. 92 went really well. And they had this post-festival. Traditionally, they would have board of directors. There was this wonderful, somebody I really liked as a human being. He was the chairman of the Space Needle Corporation. We're talking about symbol of Seattle. He had a board meeting, and all of a sudden at his territory, he said, "Oh, Dima, it was a wonderful festival, great. You did so fabulously. But next year is still too early to bring the orchestra. So let's just make another chamber music." I said, "Stuart, we had an agreement, not a written agreement, we had a gentleman's agreement. You gave me your word." He said, but I'm sure 1 year later will not. I said, "It makes a big difference to me." He said, what are you going to do? What do you say? You're not going to do it? I said, "Absolutely not." He said, "So you're going to leave?" I said, "Watch me." And I got up and I left. Immediately, the members of the board, Sam Rubinstein, who was one that said that, here's $50,000 for Dmitry Sitkovetsky to stay and bring his orchestra. And within 5-10 minutes, they got the money. He had to resign because he lost his face, because he thought, this, young Russian. He picked the wrong guy. Don't play chicken with me. I don't blink. I play an open game. You seem to think that you know what my moves are, but not necessarily. And that's what I also learned from him, is how to navigate, how to read people, a great deal of psychology. And also, I'm sure what he taught me, I probably had some inclination for being convincing, but I became super convincing. If I wanted to talk somebody into something, there was no way you were not going to do it. So I learned that also in the process of working for him and doing all these things. It's very interesting that when I left him finally in 1980, and my uncle found out about it, he said, I went to the cemetery to your father's grave, and I told him, Dima has come back. That was, for them, it was something that was just 8 years of pain and something that they could not really comprehend. For 6 months, I did not talk to them, living in the same apartment. My grandma, she could actually have she had a high blood pressure, lived to be 99, by the way. But anyway, she would fall down in the corridor, and I would just walk. And the only person I talked to was my nanny. That I'm not proud of, not at all. But I did come back, but I came back already a different person. Of course, it's the easiest thing for the parents and even grandparents to think, it's not my grandson, it's not my son, it's that terrible person who influences him. But it's never really true, because I am the one who was so drawn to him. I chose him. I wouldn't blame anybody, including him. He was what he was. Look, if I stayed just in my own environment, same shop, Central Music School, my wonderfully talented classmates, friends, but they basically wanted to succeed in their profession. That was like the most important motivation, overrule. And this is what I see in the West as well. It's, how can I get that concert? How can I get... No, that gave me a whole other perspective of the world at large. And that's what gave me ultimately that strength to leave everybody behind. If I look back, my heart would break because I left everybody who I ever loved, but I just shut that down. That's all for this chapter. I'm Dmitry Sitkovetsky, and you've been listening to Keeping the Flame, produced by Libo Studio. Next time, we'll go back to the story of how I got out of the Soviet Union. And believe me, it was nothing short of a cover-up operation.